Yes. At its peak, Palm was not just winning the handheld computing market, it was widely credited with creating it. The PalmPilot, released in 1996, succeeded where Apple's Newton had stumbled and where Hewlett-Packard's 200 Lex had only ever reached a narrow technical audience. Palm turned a pocket-sized computer into something millions of ordinary people actually wanted to carry. That is a genuinely difficult thing to do, and Palm did it first. So the question this episode sets out to answer is not simply why Palm failed, it is how a company that invented the category ended up losing the race it started. The story begins in the early 1990s, when the idea of a personal digital assistant was already circulating in Silicon Valley, but no one had made it work at scale. Apple's Newton launched in 1993 to real curiosity and immediate disappointment. It was expensive, bulky, and its handwriting recognition, the feature Apple had marketed most aggressively, was unreliable enough to become a cultural punchline. Palm Computing, then a small California company, watched that failure and drew a precise lesson from it. The problem was not that people didn't want portable computing. The problem was that the Newton tried to do too much and delivered too little of what it promised. Palm's founders decided to build something narrower, faster, and more honest about what it actually was. The result was the PalmPilot 1000, released in 1996. It did not try to recognize cursive handwriting. Instead, it asked users to learn a simplified input alphabet called Graffiti, a small ask that turned out to be a reasonable trade for a device that was light, fast, and reliable. The PalmPilot synchronized cleanly with desktop computers, fit in a shirt pocket, and held a charge for weeks on standard batteries. Those were not glamorous engineering achievements, but they were exactly the achievements that mattered to the person who needed their calendar and contacts accessible without carrying a laptop. The device became, by the sources available here, widely remembered as the first wildly popular handheld computer. That reputation was earned. From that foundation, Palm built a genuine growth flywheel. Most of its PDAs and phones ran PalmOS, the in-house operating system the company had developed and controlled. Crucially, Palm also licensed PalmOS to other manufacturers. That decision spread the platform, created a developer ecosystem, and established PalmOS as the default environment for handheld software in the late 1990s. More developers meant more applications. More applications meant more reasons to buy a Palm device or any device running PalmOS. The platform logic was sound. Palm was not just selling hardware, it was building the software infrastructure that the whole category ran on. By the early 2000s, Palm sat at the center of an expanding market that it had largely shaped. The brand had cultural weight. Executives, doctors, and students carried Palm devices as status objects as much as productivity tools. The Treo line, which combined PalmOS with phone functionality, represented the company's most ambitious hardware step, a full smartphone before the word smartphone was in common use. The Palm Centro, released in October 2007, brought that functionality into a smaller, more affordable package, extending the Treo's reach to a broader audience. At that moment, Palm appeared to be in exactly the position any technology company wants to occupy: established platform, loyal users, hardware that was still selling, and a brand that meant something. But the crack in that position was already structural, and it had been forming for years. PalmOS was a powerful platform for the devices of the late 1990s. It had been designed around the constraints of that era: limited memory, low power processors, no persistent wireless connectivity, and it solved those constraints elegantly. The problem was that the constraints changed. processors became faster. Wireless networks became viable for data. Users began expecting their devices to browse the web, play media, and run software that looked and behaved like software on a full computer. PalmOS had not been architected for that world. It could be extended and patched, and Palm did both, but the underlying design was not built for the demands that were now arriving. The company was running faster and faster on a foundation that had been poured for a different race. Palm recognized the problem. The company spent years working on what would become webOS, a ground-up replacement for PalmOS built on modern web technologies and designed for the connected, touch-first future that was now clearly visible. That decision was correct in diagnosis. A new operating system was necessary, but building a new OS, while continuing to ship and support hardware on the old one, is an extraordinarily expensive commitment in engineering resources, in management attention, and in time. Palm was making that investment at exactly the moment when a better resourced competitor was making a similar one, and the competitor moved faster. In January 2007, Apple announced the iPhone. The device ran a mobile operating system built from a desktop Unix foundation, with a multi-touch interface, a full web browser, and a software platform that Apple controlled end-to-end. The iPhone was not an incremental improvement on what Palm had built. It was a demonstration that the smartphone interface itself could be reconceived. Shortly after, Google's Android platform began offering manufacturers an open alternative, and the competitive environment compressed dramatically. Palm was now racing to finish webOS against Apple's full financial and engineering weight and the collective resources of every Android hardware partner combined. That was a structural disadvantage that no single management decision could simply reverse. webOS finally arrived in June 2009, shipping first on the Palm Pre. The platform was genuinely impressive. Reviewers praised its multitasking model and its card-based interface as ideas that were ahead of what Apple and Android were doing at that moment. But impressive ideas inside a small installed base against competitors who already had developer ecosystems and retail distribution at scale were not enough to reverse the momentum. The Palm Pre launched on Sprint in the United States, a carrier with a smaller subscriber base than AT&T or Verizon, which further limited the device's initial reach. The platform never accumulated the third-party software library that would have made it a genuine alternative for a mainstream buyer choosing between an iPhone, an Android device, and a Palm Pre. In 2010, Hewlett-Packard acquired Palm. The purchase price and strategic rationale were oriented around webOS. HP saw the software as a platform it could deploy across tablets, printers, and PCs. That vision did not materialize. In 2011, HP discontinued the Palm brand and briefly released hardware under the HP name before discontinuing that hardware as well in the same year. The Palm brand, the Palm hardware line, and the webOS ambition all effectively ended within a single 12-month period. A brand that had been synonymous with handheld computing for 15 years was retired not in a single dramatic collapse, but in a sequence of strategic retreats that each made sense in isolation and together added up to an exit. The aftermath is instructive in its own right. The Palm trademark eventually passed to TCL Corporation, the Chinese electronics company. In 2018, a San Francisco startup called Palm Ventures Group, backed by TCL, released a new device under the Palm name. It was a 3.3-inch Android phone, weighing 62.5 grams, marketed as a companion device to be paired with a main smartphone. It was, in other words, a small, simple, focused device designed to do a specific thing well, which is, if you trace the arc back, exactly what the original PalmPilot had been. The brand completed a circle, but the company that had built the original category was long gone. The precise mechanism of Palm's failure is not a story about one bad product decision or one missed meeting. It is a story about platform timing. Palm built Palm OS for the constraints of 1996, built a business around licensing and extending it, and then faced the compounding cost of maintaining that business while rebuilding the platform from scratch. At the exact historical moment when Apple arrived with a better funded and better integrated alternative. webOS was a genuine technical achievement that came late to a market that had already begun to consolidate around two platforms with larger developer ecosystems and stronger distribution. Dominance built on a platform designed for one era does not automatically transfer to the next era. That is the mechanism, and it applies well beyond Palm.